Hello, and welcome to the second session of this year's Vision Zero Cities Conference. This is Vision Zero Vignettes, Lessons from Around the World. We'll have 45 minutes to hear from our four presenters before I turn it over to Amy Cohen to introduce Ann Carlson, our keynote speaker. My name is M. Friedenberg, and I am the Research Associate here at Transportation Alternatives, as well as Editor-in-Chief of the Vision Zero Cities Journal, which is published each fall in conjunction with the Vision Zero Cities Conference. 12 articles were written this year by amazing professionals from around the world on topics ranging from the social science explaining backlash, to the economics of taxing SUVs, to why complete streets should be a bipartisan issue, to how Buenos Aires used women's transportation patterns to make the city more navigable for all residents. You can check out the full Vision Zero Cities journal on the conference website, which I'm going to send in the chat in just a minute. We're excited today to be joined by four of our journal authors, calling in from 4 different time zones around the world. They'll each give a brief presentation on their article, and then if we have time at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So please drop questions for the presenters in the chat as we go. First, I would like to welcome Gregory Lang, an urban enthusiast and software developer who used his knowledge of natural language processing, which will be defined shortly, to create a site to help erase bias in crash reporting. I'll let Greg explain more. Greg?
Thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Gregory Lang, and today I'll be sharing a software project that I've built that uses natural language processing to improve the media coverage of car crash reports. The tool is available at visionzeroreporting.com, and I encourage you to check it out. So I grew up in the suburbs, and as I got older, I subconsciously recognized that something about the way we developed our places was wrong. Cars were just a fact of life, and we didn't question their place in our daily routine. So when I went off to college and studied computer science, but picked up an interest in urban policy and suburban sprawl, my awareness of these issues expanded. And another way this was evident was in the routine news articles I was reading about people being injured and killed in car crashes. I picked up on these common patterns in news articles, regardless of which news agency was reporting them. So language patterns seemed to me to place a lot of focus on the victims, particularly bicyclists and pedestrians, and always pointed out mistakes that they made, while the article seemed to rush to the defense of drivers before an investigation had even taken place. Worse yet, drivers were almost never mentioned as people, but as objects like cars. A car jumped the curb, a car struck someone, a vehicle in a hit and run incident drove away, or an automobile stayed at the scene. Articles also had plenty of information that they didn't mention. They never seemed to me to mention road design and how America's roads are designed for speed and throughput rather than safety. They never mentioned vehicle safety standards, local safety initiatives, or any of the other big picture information. So I set out to check if my hunch was real. I searched online and found many research papers that confirmed my suspicion that car crash articles do in fact have many of these patterns. The paper that I based my work off of is listed here, and it does confirm how victims overwhelmingly receive the focus of the focus of the article is on them, and they also receive a lot of the blame. Most of the articles refer to objects like cars rather than drivers. And most importantly, articles never frame the problem thematically. So they never discuss the statistics, the trends about how road design, for example, underlies a lot of the issues. The difficulty with research like this was that it relied heavily on labor-intensive annotation. So researchers have to go in and manually identify issues. The good news is that I have a background in software engineering. I actually didn't study civil engineering. I developed software for the Department of Defense. So I've worked on contracts as a civilian for the Air Force, Navy, and the US Special Operations Command. But I do have an interest in urban policy and suburban sprawl and things like this. So luckily, I am able to apply my software background to solve an issue like this. So what is natural language processing? Natural language processing is a subset of machine learning, and it basically ask the question, how can we extract information from written text? If we have articles, blog posts, social media posts, what information can we extract from it? That could be people's names, dates, places, and so on. Other topics include sentiment analysis, automated translation, and question and answering. So I want to use natural language processing to identify 6 categories of issues in the articles. The first is framing. So articles can describe car crashes thematically. They can mention trends, statistics. They can include quotes from local experts or local officials, and help develop an understanding among readers that car crashes are a systemic problem and not just single incidents. They can also, the second framing is episodic. So treating a car crash as a one-time incident in a fact of life. Second category is counterfactuals. We see phrases all the time in car crash reports that are true statements. Things like a bicyclist was hit and wasn't wearing a helmet. These are true statements, of course, but they tend to shift blame onto the victims and imply that their outcomes would have been different if they had just worn a helmet, for example. And counterfactuals absolve the responsible actors of their responsibility, the drivers, the people who are responsible for designing safe roads and so on. We look for the term accident as opposed to crash. We also look for object-based reference, so referring to cars rather than drivers. Agency refers to if an agent is mentioned at all. So for example, a pedestrian was struck versus a pedestrian was struck by a driver or a car. And the last is focus. So who is the focus of the sentence? Do we primarily focus on the victim or the people responsible? These are just a few strategies that I used in my project. So just a technical background of how the system works. One category is named entity recognition. So we can train a system to recognize certain terms of interest. Of course, I trained a custom model to recognize certain features like a car or a roadway. I also use subject verb object analysis to determine actors and what actions were taking place. For example, a man was walking down the street, a person was bicycling, and so on. And finally, we use co-reference resolution to tie it together. So in the last sentence, the word man and he refer to the same person. And that's important because in this sentence, we need to determine that the man was walking in order to determine he was a vulnerable road user. So this is the end product. If you visit the website, you can plug in real news articles and see the system in action. It's highlighting certain points of interest. So it's highlighting the word accident. It's highlighting counterfactual statements such as victims not wearing reflective clothing or not wearing helmets. It highlights when we refer to people as cars rather than drivers. So this is a really exciting tool. And there are a few major applications. The first is, of course, based on the research. Researchers can now apply this tool at a massive scale, so they no longer have to manually annotate hundreds of articles. Journalists, I'd like also to audit their articles to improve their writing and remove some of the bias in their writing. In order to build this application, I manually had to annotate over 800 news articles. And there's a lot of humanity behind the articles. We're reading stories about people being injured and killed. And the news articles do not bridge the gap between explaining the event took place and helping readers actually understand that these are systemic problems that we can prevent. So I believe the movement to build safer places begins with how we communicate. We're all at this Vision Zero conference to communicate strategies, communicate policies, communicate our stories, and communicate our vision for a world that's safer for people. It's important that we recognize that a big part of how the public perceives this issue is determined by their local news agencies' coverage of these tragic events. That's why I built Vision Zero reporting to improve the way news articles report car crashes. And I hope you check out the website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. That is so inspiring. It's so cool to see something that removes bias begin to combat it. Because we know that when you communicate that as a person, people tend to assume that you just have a different bias. So that's a really fascinating site. Next, we'll turn to Fanny Rachimta. Fanny is the Senior Communications Associate at ITDP Indonesia. She was born and raised in Jakarta and is very prepared to tell us about how Jakarta's public transportation network has been modernized and built out in the last decades. Can I turn it over to you, Fanny?
Hello, thank you, Em. I will share the screen first. Hi, hello everyone. I'm Fanny, Senior Communications and Partnership Manager of ITDP Indonesia. We are an NGO that promotes sustainable transport by giving technical assistance for cities worldwide to develop a sustainable transport system. So when we approached to write about Jakarta, we felt excited to share our works and the process of Jakarta's transformation, especially in sustainable transport over the last decades. Even though there's still a long way to go, I think it could be a great lesson learned, best practice for cities worldwide on how to develop a sustainable transport system in a car-oriented cities. So for the last decades, the Jakarta official has had ups and downs in implementing programs, projects to push the public transport system to solve congestion and aim for a zero emission public transport. The development of a bus rapid transit or BRT, we call it Transjakarta in 2004, actually this didn't necessarily solve the mobility problem, nor did the underground MRT or elevated train system LRT Jakarta. So what other efforts and acts should Jakarta take? So there was time when public transport in Jakarta operated without standard operating procedure or even a surface level agreements, and it added with the lack of the government oversight caused aggressive profiteering by the transit operators. So for the passengers, safety and comfort were non-existent. Sexual harassment, violence, and pickpocketing were rampant. I personally, I myself still couldn't still surprised that I could get this through these situations, especially as a woman, because when I got pickpocketed in the night on my way home in an nearly empty bus, and the driver just stood there watching the whole fiasco, or in a broad daylight. I just witnessed another woman got mugged with a knife, and the passengers couldn't do anything with it. It is also not including the headway where we had to not only wait for the fleet to arrive, but also to depart from our stop, as they always wait for the fleet to be filled with passengers until they decided to board. So in 2004, in the introduction of the first BRT in Indonesia even Transjakarta actually gave the Jakartans a glimmer of hope, but it is also after 18 years, Transjakarta operated on 13 corridors and served 1 million passengers daily before the pandemic, and most of the growth came in the last few years. So before 2016, the Transjakarta was serving 300,000 passengers each day. And then in 2019, the Jaklingko, a public transport integration system consisting of physical, tariff, and operational integration, was launched by the city. The Jaklingko aimed to bring together all the city's public transport modes into one cohesive system, starting with the many microbuses, or we call it angkot. And then when the long-awaited metro, the MRT Jakarta, finished its first phase of development in 2019 and began operating along with the LRT, the need for the integration was urgently increased. So during the pandemic, the city also experienced a bike boom. with a 1,000% increase of cyclists on one street in the city center. The 11-kilometer pop-up bike lane was introduced just prior to the lockdown, and after 2 years of advocacy from ITDP, the pop-up bike lane turns into a permanent protected bike lane, the first one in Indonesia. In 2021, the city of Jakarta also pushed an electrification program, which is become a main project for the Indonesian government, but unfortunately only focus on cars. And with the support of many global and local organizations, Jakarta pledged to electrify all Transjakarta buses by 2030 and committed to run 100 pilot electric buses by the end of this year. And for now, we have 30 low-deck e-buses are running for 200 kilometers daily. However, the pool policy that Jakarta has been implemented includes a high-quality public transport system, proper walking and cycling facilities. They has, implemented successfully, but however, the push policy to reduce the use of the private motorized vehicle is still not feasible in the planning. The congestion pricing plan called electronic road pricing or ERP has been in planning since 2006, and to this day it has yet to be implemented. And another push policy Jakarta can apply is parking fare management, which will raise the on and off street parking fees for motorized private vehicles, yet it hasn't been implemented also until now. So Jakarta is certainly on the right track. Just this summer, Jakarta launched the Old Town Area Revitalization effort by pedestrianizing one of the main roads and making it another hub station for public transportation. But I do think that more radical action are needed to supplement the pedestrian, cyclist, and public transport policy with effort to push people out of cars. That's it from Jakarta. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fanny. That is amazing. It's so cool to see how much progress Jakarta has made. And very cool to see how the same approaches work so well in so many cities all around the world in very different climates and very different communities, because we know it works. So next, I would like to welcome Madeline Brosen, who is the Deputy Director of the UCLA Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies. Together with Los Angeles Walk's Executive Director John Yee, Madeline wrote a piece investigating inequities in Los Angeles's traffic violence crisis and one possible solution. Can I turn it over to you, Madeline?
Yes, let me just go ahead and share my slides here. All right, well, thank you very much for letting me join you this morning and sharing a little bit about what's happening in Los Angeles and how some of our partners are coming together to address some of the inequities that we're seeing on the research side. So I'm here, my name is Madeline Brosen, and I work for the UCLA Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies, and this piece was co-authored by John Yee, who's the Executive Director of Los Angeles Walks. So, to this audience, these facts are probably not new in terms of the scale of traffic violence that we're seeing in Los Angeles, across the United States and the world. But I do think it's important to kind of ground the fact that according to the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, traffic violence is the third leading cause of premature death in Los Angeles County, and that's just behind heart disease and drug overdoses. And we see these crashes all over the city. And there was a very tragic one this summer in Windsor Hills. Windsor Hills is an affluent Black community, and 5 people were killed as a woman traveled 90 miles an hour down a city street. And connecting with Greg's point and going back through all the news articles that this horrific crash Not a single one of them actually said, what is the speed limit on that street relative to how fast this driver was going when she killed these people? Earlier, I had done some research looking at crash patterns, not just where they happen, as we know that they happen within our predominantly communities of color, but who they happen to. So from 2013 to 2017, 1 in 4 traffic deaths in the city of Los Angeles was a Black or Latino pedestrian. And while I kind of want to say, don't believe that nobody walks in LA, lots of people walk in LA. But even so, this is really out of scale with both the population representation and how much people are walking relative to how much people are traveling. But in the past 2 years of the pandemic, as we've seen across the country, this has only gotten worse. And now 1 in 3 traffic deaths is a Black or Latino pedestrian. So we know in terms of what all of the best practice say that really street design is a key element to making sure that when crashes happen, they are not so severe, and to really make sure that they don't happen at all. But in this piece, John and I argue that all of these traffic design and engineering approaches must go hand in hand with working with the people who are directly affected by the issue. To that point, we want to talk a little bit about what Los Angeles Walks is doing. Los Angeles Walks is a nonprofit that works primarily with immigrant and monolingual Spanish speakers to mobilize for change. And you can see a number of their community members, their staff here on one of their organized walks. What Los Angeles Walks has done is really address this public health problem through a public health solution. So community health workers is a model that has been long used in public health to have trusted people talk to their peers about how they can help solve their problems. So they created a Safe Street Promodor Educator program. And this isn't the education that's part of the 5 E's. This is not people saying, here's how you ride a bike or here's how you cross. These are people educating their peers with hyperlocal, culturally appropriate information on how to access, navigate, and advocate for infrastructure in their communities. These promotores, who are largely Spanish-speaking women, have had many wins in their short existence. They've helped Los Angeles Walks secure $80,000 in grants to further their work. They've worked to advocate for safe sidewalks, speed humps, and they've also used this as a professional development opportunity just to better their own lives. And really with the confidence that they gain through the Promotore program, they've actually done things like taking English classes or getting their GED. So not only is this program a way to help people improve their communities, it's also encouraging them to help them improve themselves. And so this is really the first visible win that the group has had. This is a beautiful decorative crosswalk. It was the first one that the city of LA had ever installed. It was one that reflected this group's ideas about the design, but also their energy and their bureaucratic endurance and passion. For anyone that works in cities, you know, getting the first thing is always the most difficult to do. And that's difficult even when you're inside as a city staffer. These group, through their advocacy and helping each other and having confidence, were able to do it from the outside. And Los Angeles Walks has now had 3 cohorts of these fabulous champions for safe streets. But given the scale of the problem, where we're now having 300 people a year die on our streets, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of people that are injured as well, we need to scale up what Los Angeles Walks model is doing. So that's why in this piece, they're really arguing that community outreach needs to be institutionalized in departments. You know, as the last presenter said, This is a point to have a radical shift in how we're doing things. So this is just an example to kind of illustrate how this might work as an organization. So the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, which is one of many city agencies in Los Angeles that work to further the Vision Zero plan and policy, they have 5 departments at kind of the top level. And what we're saying is that community outreach with embedded promotores needs to be its own department. Community outreach cannot be something that's just added on to the project each time, but rather having people that can be ready to do grassroots outreach that are the same people that look like the communities that these problems are happening in. These people can build relationships and listen to people regularly, not just when there's a project, not just when there's an investment to be made, but as a way to build trust and confidence and build solutions with the people that are affected most. So with that, I want to thank you and thank my co-author, John, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Madeline. That was fantastic. A super, super inspiring example and a great example of how we don't just need to go to communities and tell them what we're doing or ask them what we should do, or even just engage, but like integrate them into the entire process from the start. So thank you, and we'll turn to our last speaker, Olukokun Tolu. Tolu is the CEO of Think Bikes, an electric cargo bike manufacturer based out of Nigeria, which is providing a more sustainable and practical transportation solution to his community. Tolu, you want to take it away?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And my name is Tolu Lopez, I've been introduced, and I want to talk about how electric cargo bike can help the economy of Africa. So there are identifiable problems in Nigeria, which I believe cut across other African countries. Well, we do not have efficient last mile transportation, as people depend so much on trucks, and those are really expensive and not reliable. And accessibility is also a problem. And the National Bureau of Statistics said that Nigeria has only 60 vehicles per 1,000 people, which is grossly inadequate. Also, talking about sustainability, Vision Zero, and this current solution exudes a lot of carbon and air pollution. So we discovered that micromobility offers so much benefit and advantage, especially because Africa is cash poor, and they need something that can as well bring in more profit, fit into their economy, and also help, reduce poverty. Part of the problem is also the fact that food insecurity is about 50%, as farmers lose their post-harvest loss, and farmers lose their harvest as a post-harvest loss, and this also creating more tension in the system, especially with lack of jobs, women not being able to be as productive as they want. And that is why we have the electric cargo bike that can do most of this transportation for them. It's a typical way of conveying food from the farm to the market. Now, if that would be done, the vehicle will stay at a far remote area where people will rather use their head, put the load on their head to load it in the vehicle. Well, with cargo bikes now, they can go into the rural communities, into the farm, off-road, bringing all this food to the market directly, or use another transportation system going forward. So what do we do at Think Bike? So far, we've been able to figure out that our offerings are really helping small businesses and helping them to turn profit. They're able to employ more people. It's very convenient with women. They are now very productive, and they are getting more sustainable. So plastic waste recyclers are using this, farmers are using the electric cargo bike, which is very fascinating. And we also have another offering whereby we're able to offer cold box as one of these cargo bikes. for perishables and all that we have. So what are the impacts of cargo bike in Nigeria and as well as other African countries? We believe this will reduce greenhouse gas emission significantly because last mile segment is a very important segment in our economy, and small businesses are the highest employer of labor. And if we're able to electrify their mobility and use this last mile mobility, it's going to help significantly in reducing carbon emission, and that will be, in line with SDG 13. Also, we are reducing the transition from the harvest to market. Also, that helps reduce post-harvest loss by at least 20%, and this can help, bring a lot of people out of food insecurity on a yearly basis, and we'll be addressing SDGs too like that. And because we all know that sustainable communities is very important and very key, electric mobility has been identified as one of the ways to have that, and having electric cargo bike will be very beneficial to our communities in Africa. So we've been having a lot of successes, but there have been a lot of challenges as well. Number one of it is that there are no ready-made professionals. We are practically the pioneer of electric cargo bikes in Nigeria, and we have to train people to be able to get into those jobs, despite that we have opportunities to employ a lot of people across the value chain, whether in in the use cases or in the production, or anyhow you think about it. Then also capital seems difficult in this part of the world. We've been bootstrapping since 2 years, and we are here. I'm currently in Kigali trying to talk to some investors to see the impact of what we're doing, and also regulations. Regulation is one of the challenges. We do not have any regulation currently in Nigeria that is against micromobility. In fact, the government are big on it. They are trying to advocate for it, but there are no regulations that support it in that. We don't have bike lanes, and they are not even thinking about it. They can just advocate for use of bicycle, but there are no infrastructure that supports it. So all of these are some of the challenges identified. There are so many other challenges, but when these three are settled, I think it's a good one for us in Nigeria and Africa. And at the end of the day, it will come down to clean energy, healthy living, and environmental sustainability. It's a known term in Africa that if you are using bicycle, it means you are poor. It's changing now because bicycles will actually help your economy rather than portraying you as being poor. So we will begin to choose whether we want our ego or we want the economy to be improved. And lastly, it will be the best thing that can ever happen to us or to the world if we adopt electric bicycles, electric cargo bike in all of its forms. And that will be my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tolu. That's so incredible and inspiring, and not super unrelated from what Madeline was presenting about how these things need to be integrated into the community, needs to be locally built, as well as locally serving to succeed. So we have some extra time here. We have 10 minutes and we can answer some questions from the audience. Tolu, we got a question since you're here about what like charging infrastructure looks like for these electric bikes, and what's on the horizon for your company.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Well, the charging infrastructure. So most times when we talk about e-mobility, we talk about charging infrastructure, and it's a chicken and egg situation. Which one comes first? But as a manufacturer, I care much more about my product getting to the hands of the people. But then the utility is much more important. So what we currently do is we give them a charger that can make them charge from home. And there are other offerings like using, like swapping the batteries. So you don't necessarily need to charge because the batteries are swappable. Also, we are trying to work with some startups that are offering this swapping method. And again, these bicycles are solar ready. So they can be charged via solar panel. And our next offering will have solar on board of it, in which it can charge on the go. When it comes to charging infrastructure, I believe that's another investment that our market could create. We don't want to handle everything because, like I said, we are still bootstrapping and we have limited resources to throw around. So we are choosing our strength, and that's how we're working on it right now.
That's so amazing. Let me know when you expand to New York City. We'd love to have you here. I'd love to turn it over to Fanny. We got a question about congestion pricing and how you got that passed, which made me wonder how you would, what kind of response Jakarta got to all of these infrastructure changes, and when there was criticism, which we see a lot of here in New York City, how the city responded to that.
So yeah, actually the BRT one back in 2004, the governor got a massive backlash with the development of the corridors, and the recent one actually with the protected bike lane. So we had a a very harsh response from most of it is car and motorcycle users is not keen with the new infrastructure. But I think the key is just to to moving forward, just because the political is very strong when the protected bike lane deployed, and even we have several massive infrastructure for the hub station for the public transport in the center of the city, we actually from our side we also trying to always providing data. As for the bike lane, the protected bike lane, we found from our survey 12-hour surveys on who showing people who is using the bike lane, and we found that the vulnerable groups such as we have this a coffee what do you say, a coffee vendor using bicycles that using the protected bike lane, and also even that we have people with disabilities also using bicycles for work and using the bike lane. So when we show the data to the public, the debate is quite stop there, and because in Indonesia especially the social media is really a big have a big impact. So we actually have to deal with the criticism from the social media, and have to answer it also through the social media. So we usually providing an infographic or anything that to provide the public with the data and on why the infrastructure is being built. And yes, I think that's the answer.
Sounds like people are much more reasonable in Indonesia than in the United States. Madeline, I'd love to turn to you for kind of a similar question. So during the pandemic, there were a lot of cities that used quick build, kind of tactical urbanist style approaches to just put changes out on the street. And then they went to the community afterwards for feedback and said, we can take it out if you guys hate it. But in general, they were often, once people see it in person, it's less scary. And so it was, supported. So could you kind of address these two approaches and when one might be more relevant than the other?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a saying that kind of is more used when it comes to quick build bus lanes, that the pilot is the process. And so there was Los Angeles definitely did some quick build responses to things. The largest program was really around our businesses and doing outdoor dining on streets, parking lots, and sidewalks, which had some of its own ADA concerns. But in terms of kind of slow, the one of the more popular ones was our Slow Streets neighborhood program. And there was overwhelming interest. So this was a program where rather than the city coming out and saying, okay, we're going to do these slow streets on particular areas, they opened it up to a process to allow people to nominate places and then review them. It was also a way for organizations and neighborhoods that had been already trying to organize around things to actually test some of their kind of proof of concept. So in that case, there was a neighborhood group that had actually already secured a grant to do a slow street. And really kind of the slow street program during the pandemic showed them proof of concept. The problem, I think, in all of these programs was just about the neighborhood capacity in low-income communities of color. The majority of applications in the alfresco dining program, in the Slow Streets program, came from white, wealthier neighborhoods. And so there is definitely, I think that we need to be very cognizant of that while transportation, and even when it's to the level of really affecting people's life and safety, is not necessarily top of mind when you're just struggling to make ends meet, especially in a city with such an affordability crisis as Los Angeles. So I think that's, maybe I'm just kind of being a little self-serving here, to come back to have a part of transportation departments that really just have ongoing relationships, because being proactive about reaching out and engaging with communities when you're doing these types of open calls, I think is a way to ensure that you're not just having applications that community that are coming from community, but are coming from communities that maybe have more time and capacity than others.
That was very beautifully said. I think we have time for one last question. Greg, can I turn to you? So activists and urban planning professionals have no shortage of needs from a tech side, and data is often rather inaccessible. They don't know how to create incredible tools like this. So how do you think that their field and the field of tech and software can come together to create more sites like your own?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So the project I built was certainly technically challenging, and even the first attempt that I made in building it failed. So it took me about another year to gain additional skills in machine learning and natural language processing to go attempt it a second time. So I do think that there's obviously a bigger need for these tools, and I think that there's also a way to help people who don't have the software or technical skills to still contribute. So Vision Zero reporting, of course, we need data to train the model to recognize certain features in news articles. So of course, there's a big crowdsourcing effort that could take place where if people are seeing these articles in their local news agencies, there could be a mechanism for them to help submit these articles as well as annotate them to help identify certain features that we want to look for.
Amazing. Yeah. Do you want to drop your link or your email in the chat there in case anyone's interested in helping out?
Certainly. Yeah.
I think we are ready to turn it over. So I'm going to pass well, first of all, thank you so much to our panelists here, as well as all of the authors of the 2022 Vision Zero Cities Journal. You can read all of the articles. There are 12 of them on our website. So just go to the main conference website and they'll be there. And so I will pass the mic now over to Amy Cohen, who is the co-founder of Families for Safe Streets, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks to the panelists. That was quite a session. Well, we are grateful to acting NHTSA Administrator Ann Carlson for joining us today. On behalf of all those who have lost a family member in a crash, as I have, as well as all those who have suffered life-altering injuries, we are counting on federal regulatory leadership to help us end this crisis. Acting Administrator Carlson oversees the nation's vehicle safety agency that sets vehicle safety standards, identifies safety defects, and manages recalls, administers hundreds of millions of dollars in grants to state highway safety offices, establishes fuel economy regulation, and helps facilitate the testing and deployment of advanced vehicle technologies. Carlson previously served as NHTSA's chief counsel, where she played a critical role in advancing the agency's safety mission, including regulatory work on advanced driver assistance systems, AEB, automatic emergency braking, pedestrian AEB, and more. Before joining NHTSA, Carlson served on the faculty of UCLA Law School as the Shirley Shapiro Professor of Environmental Law and the faculty co-director of the Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. As an introduction, I would like to quote a predecessor, the very first administrator of NHTSA, Dr. William Haddon, in an article about how he thought it was folly to attempt to educate drivers. He told a reporter, quote, "We've all been miseducated that the way to solve this problem is to have more squads of police chasing Americans so they wouldn't drive 120 miles an hour, rather than just arranging cars so they can't go that fast." Today, even though speed governing technology has been around for decades, we still have not reached Haddon's hope. When the NHTSA administration was created in 1970, the agency was charged with regulating automakers. Dr. Haddon, a physician, led the agency through a public health lens, as we heard about today, how important that is. This was a first. Never before had traffic crashes been understood as a solvable, preventable public health problem. For decades instead, they'd simply been accidents caused by nuts behind the wheel. In those early years following Haddon's leadership, NHTSA passed a flurry of vehicle safety regulations requiring seatbelts, collapsible steering columns, occupant protection, shatterproof glass, and much, much more in every American vehicle. These are things we just all take for granted today. Automakers, however, protested these regulations mightily, but NHTSA persisted. As a result of those regulations, traffic fatalities fell for many decades. But with each passing year, NHTSA would pass fewer and fewer safety regulations. In an anti-regulatory political climate, voluntary guidance friendly to automakers became preferred. NHTSA administrators would pass through the revolving door to go to work for the automakers they were charged with regulating. Meanwhile, Europe, Japan, and nearly every industrialized nation continue to strictly regulate vehicles and continue to watch traffic fatalities decline. If we'd done it here, maybe my son would still be alive. But instead, today in the US, traffic fatalities are rising, and with ever larger SUVs and light trucks, unregulated for their size or weight, the fastest driving traffic fatalities are among people biking and walking like my son, Sam. We are hopeful with the new administration at US DOT, this terrible trend will change. We are hopeful for finally reaching William Haddon's vision of simply designing cars that can't go 120 miles an hour, with the regulation of intelligent speed assist and restriction on vehicle size to protect those most vulnerable, people walking and biking, from the worst impacts. And we are so eager today to hear what Acting Administrator Carlson has to share about all of that. So without further ado, I am honored to introduce and welcome Acting Administrator Carlson. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for those words. They're thoughtful and provocative, and I appreciate you laying down the gauntlet for us. We really are committed to safety in everything that we do, and I'll spend a few minutes today talking about some of the things that we're doing. And we're also committed to regulation. I just want to stress that we've issued 17 regulations since we began in January of 2021. We've got 9 what are called notices of proposed rulemakings out right now, and a whole lot more rules in the hopper. So it's not the only thing we're doing, but I do want to just stress that at the outset, and I appreciate hearing those words of the very first administrator. I really do appreciate the opportunity to join you today. I wish I could be there in person, and I'm sorry that I'm not. And I also want to just share with you that I, along with everyone at NHTSA and at the Department of Transportation, share your commitment to saving lives. Our goal is 0. We strive to reach the day when 0 lives are lost due to traffic crashes, when no one has to say goodbye to a loved one taken too soon. And I do want to take a moment to recognize some important people in the audience today. Amy, I include you in this group who would probably rather be anywhere else than in their own shoes. The members of the Families of Safe Streets, who are mentored by Transportation Alternatives, have turned their grief into leadership. Some of our most powerful advocates are people who have been victimized by traffic crashes. We think it's really, really important to hear your voices. There's no one who can express more powerfully and more emotionally the effects of traffic crashes on individual people's lives. And that really inspires us to try to work to change our roads and to keep us all safe. And so I really thank you for your continued leadership and advocacy. I don't know if you always know how important it is to us to hear from the voices of people who have been victimized by traffic crashes. Many of us have, some much more personally than others. And it really is important for us to hear. So thank you for sharing your advocacy, and thank you for your leadership. So safety really is number 1 at NHTSA. It's at the heart of everything we do. We address safety in many ways. We are addressing vulnerable road users, as Amy talked about, the problems with increasing fatalities for pedestrians and cyclists. We address vehicle design, we engage in public education, we address vehicle defects, risky driving behaviors, and importantly, and a part of our mission that not everybody always appreciates, we also work to improve EMS and 911 services. Every decision we make is focused on making our roads safer for everyone, while integrating policies that make transportation more environmentally friendly and equitable. We share your commitment to Vision Zero. We firmly believe that we can reach the day when there are no more traffic fatalities. We believe this because we as a society cannot accept the loss of more than 42,000 people each year as the cost of business as usual. We're in a crisis, and we know that, and we need to act. So this administration and this department are firmly committed to policies to save lives and to lay the groundwork for a safer transportation future. Thanks to the president's bipartisan infrastructure law, we call it the bill, which is kind of funny that a bill passed and is called the bill. This administration is making unprecedented investments in public transit, in rail, in pedestrian and bike facilities, and infrastructure that we're building back better. So one of the things I want to emphasize is that this is a department-wide approach. NHTSA is centrally involved, but we're not alone. We have a lot of partners across DOT in this. I want to quote from the department's National Roadway Safety Strategy. We face a crisis on our roadways. It is both unacceptable and solvable. Over the next few minutes, I'll share how we're working to solve this public health crisis, again, to use the language of our first administrator and the lens through which he looked at traffic safety. Let me start by acknowledging the trends we see. Over the past couple of years, our data releases have been a grim ritual of bad and worsening news. We've also seen an increase in risky driving behaviors, including speeding, impairment, and not using a seatbelt. Distracted driving also remains a concern. However, for the first time in a long time, there was a ray of hope in the data we released last month. While the overall numbers for the first 6 months of 2022 worsened year over year by a slight amount, the data for April to June showed a decrease in fatalities when compared to the previous year's second quarter. That's right. So the second quarter of 2022 saw the first decline in fatalities after 7 consecutive quarters of increases that started with the third quarter of 2020. And if you do the math, that's the beginning of the pandemic. We all thought fatalities would go down with the pandemic as people drove less. The opposite happened. But we hope that we're at the beginning of a new trend in fatalities. We also saw a small decline in the fatality rate per 100 million miles driven in the second quarter from 1.34 to 1.27. These are early estimates, so we don't have specifics about the causes yet. But we know it will take a combination of factors, including education to change behavior, vehicle design and technology changes, infrastructure improvements, enforcement to drive these numbers down. I should emphasize, even though we're seeing a slight decline, we are not happy about these numbers. They're way too high. The only acceptable number is 0, but we do hope this shows the beginning of a trend in the right direction and an end to the quarter-over-quarter increases. Times like these require that we shake up the status quo and embrace solutions like the safe system approach, which is embodied in the Department of Transportation's National Roadway Safety Strategy. The safe system approach is meant to be holistic. It looks at all the factors in traffic fatalities and proposes solutions that address short and long-term objectives. The safe system approach is people-focused. For example, infrastructure, including roads and emergency services, is designed and maintained to serve users' needs. The safe system approach is equitable. It considers the needs of everyone on the road, not just drivers and passengers, but pedestrians, cyclists, children, motorcyclists, older Americans, and people with disabilities. We urge everyone in the transportation space to consider the 5 key objectives of the NRSS: safer people, safer roads, safer vehicles, safer speeds, and improved post-crash care. All of these elements need to be part of our focus for our transportation system to function safely for everyone. NHTSA and the US Department of Transportation have embraced the safe system approach wholeheartedly. That means FHWA, it means FTA, it means every mode across the Department of Transportation, all the way up to the Secretary in the National Roadway Safety Strategy and in how we do our work. A safe system approach also acknowledges historical disparities in traffic crashes and in infrastructure and seeks to eliminate them. That starts by listening to the voices of those who use the streets, particularly communities of color, underrepresented communities, and people with disabilities. The bipartisan infrastructure law actually imposes a new requirement on us that really imposes meaningful public participation in state grant programs. For example, and I'm going to quote from the bill itself, meaningful public participation and engagement from affected communities, particularly those most significantly impacted by traffic crashes resulting in injuries and fatalities, must occur. In other words, equity. Safety and equity have to go hand in hand. We can't have a system that delivers only for some. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are also part of the foundation of the department's strategic plan. This roadmap supports and engages people and communities to promote safe, affordable, accessible, and multimodal access to opportunities and services while reducing transportation-related disparities, adverse community impacts, and health effects. I know you have several panels during this conference focused on these objectives. For Vision Zero to succeed, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility need to be part of the solution. Everyone uses our roads and everyone deserves a say. The department is also focused on improving infrastructure across this country. And one of the great things about the bipartisan infrastructure law is a huge infusion of new resources into improving infrastructure. This should take place in cities and at the state level, and protecting vulnerable road users is key. We know that vulnerable road user fatalities have grown. We estimate that pedestrian deaths were up 13% in 2021, and cyclist fatalities are estimated to have increased by 5%. These numbers are not acceptable. NHTSA recently published some new research that sheds light on ways that we can all address these trends, and then also talk about some of the other steps that we're taking. So one concept that is really interesting in this space is the concept of safety in numbers, which proposes that the probability of being in a crash with a vehicle decreases when more people are biking and walking. Our evaluation showed a positive correlation with this in cycling. When more people ride bikes, the rate of crashes between cyclists and vehicles declines. We haven't, however, seen this effect for pedestrians, so we all have more work to do in this area. We also looked at the Idaho Stop, which you may or may not know, allows cyclists to treat stop signs as yields. Based on the current research and data, these laws provide additional safety benefits for cyclists in those states where we evaluated the process. The Idaho Stop allows cyclists to manage risks to their advantage. It increases their visibility to drivers and reduces their exposure. It also promotes safety in numbers, we hope, by encouraging more people to bike, which, as we've already said, reduces cyclists' overall risks. NHTSA also focuses, as I said earlier, on post-crash care through our Office of Emergency Medical Services. We know that 40% of crash victims who survive the initial impact die after the arrival of emergency medical services. That shows that timely, effective post-crash care is vital to preventing serious injury or death. Getting the right care to the right place at the right time can make all the difference in saving the life of a vulnerable road user. But solving the public health crisis of traffic deaths will require new approaches and resources. As I said, many of those originate from the bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and its vast new resources for traffic safety. The law increases NHTSA's overall budget by more than 50%, allowing us to make historic investments in vehicle and road safety. And we're not the only part of DOT that got big increases. Bill gives us the resources to implement the Safe System approach and the National Roadway Safety Strategy. With these new resources come new responsibilities and scrutiny to ensure that we are making the American public safer. We also need to ensure that our spending and grants do what they are designed to do, make traveling on our roads safe for everyone. We need to bend the curve on traffic deaths all the way to zero. This is the direction from Congress, and NHTSA is committed to that mandate. One thing I want to stress about the various tools we have under the Safe System approach is that some tools can be implemented more quickly than others. Let me start with vehicle safety standards, which are super important, and they also take a while to actually penetrate the entire vehicle fleet. These standards are a crucial part of the Safe System approach. We have many rulemakings underway, and I'll tell you about a few of them in a moment. We're especially excited about our upcoming rulemaking on pedestrian automatic emergency braking. AEB, as we call it, helps prevent crashes or reduce their severity by applying a vehicle's brakes automatically. Pedestrian AEB can also detect people in the road and can help the driver react quickly. These are really important safety technologies that will help prevent crashes and will reduce a vehicle's speed in those crashes that do actually occur. That will save lives. We're also working on rulemakings on advanced impaired driving technology, rear seatbelt reminders, and a new female crash test dummy. Pedestrian protection improvements are also a priority for us, and we're working on a rulemaking proposal that will establish requirements to protect pedestrians' heads when striking passenger vehicle hoods. We're also continuing our efforts to upgrade our 5-star safety rating programs and publish a proposal to add a pedestrian protection program that will measure how well passenger vehicles protect pedestrians. However, as I started this part of the conversation with, it takes years to develop safety standards due to the complexity of the regulatory process, and then they're only implemented on new cars. People are hanging on to their cars longer, and the average vehicle is more than 12 years old. So the safety benefits from technological changes, they're crucial to Vision Zero, but they take a long time to realize in the vehicle fleet. We can't just wait for those to kick in and not do something about the traffic fatality crisis. Other tools can be mobilized more quickly. Adding a crosswalk at an unsafe intersection doesn't take years to construct. Delineating a bike lane promotes more cycling and safety in numbers. And focusing on the behavioral obstacles to safe driving can happen quickly and deliver real and immediate results for all road users. Reminding people to drive sober, to put down their phones, and avoid speeding is never a bad thing. These more immediate measures show why we need to use every tool we have in the toolbox to bend the curve on traffic fatalities. NHTSA also supports innovative approaches through the Road to Zero grant program, funded by NHTSA and administered by the National Safety Council. We're gearing up for the next round of funding, and I encourage you, if you're with an organization that would be eligible, to consider applying. In addition to vehicle safety, NHTSA also issues standards to ensure the fuel economy of vehicles on our nation's roads. And of course, transportation is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases of any sector in the United States. The future of transportation is electric, and more companies are rolling out electric vehicles to meet demand. While the industry transitions, we still have room to improve the fossil fuel fleet. Earlier this year, I oversaw the issuance of the most stringent year-over-year increases in light-duty fuel economy standards in the agency's history. These new standards will reduce our nation's gasoline consumption by more than 220 billion gallons as compared to continuing under the old standards. And that's a great thing for all of us because less gas burned means less smog, less pollution, and less noxious tailpipe emissions. We're now working on a new set of standards for light-duty vehicles and more stringent standards for trucks. These standards will help move us toward a cleaner vehicle fleet and will also cut greenhouse gases dramatically. We want cleaner air for everyone, including those who are biking and walking. I know this issue is a particular concern to many urban cyclists and pedestrians who breathe in the exhaust from dirty vehicles. We're trying to transition to a much cleaner fleet. These environmental benefits will be good for all of us, and I'm very, very proud of the work that we've done on this vital issue and will continue to do over the next several years. Before I conclude, I want to leave you with this. It's a sobering thought. In 2021, one person was killed in a traffic crash every 12 minutes, according to our estimates. That's one life that ended in the time it took me to deliver these remarks. It can be too easy to think of these mind-blowing numbers, 43,000 people killed on our roadways, as abstract statistics. But as you know all too well, these are not just statistics. Every life lost is a person. They're a parent, a child, a spouse, a partner, a sibling, or a best friend. We cannot accept the deaths of more than 42,000 people a year as the new normal. If there ever was a time for action, it's now. Vision Zero can become a reality, and the Department of Transportation is committed to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for giving those moving remarks. We will be here to hold your feet to the fire and make sure that USDOT, NHTSA, really puts in place the proven solutions to save lives. I just want to thank you for joining us and remind all of our participants that our next panel will be at 2 p.m. entitled Slow It Down, Managing Speed for Safety.
Amy, I was just going to say, I think my feet are already smoking, so I feel it. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.